I've always hated the smell of jasmine, maybe because it was my mother's favorite perfume, and she disappeared when I was 7, leaving behind only a half-open suitcase and a glass bottle with dried flowers at the bottom. But it was exactly that scent I smelled in the air years later when I opened another suitcase, this time hastily thrown into the Savannah River, its zipper stuck inside and a dark stain seeping through its metal teeth. Why would someone leave a bottle of perfume next to a body? And why always the same one? Jasmine. When I began investigating the disappearance of Lana Myers, a teacher who had filed a report of assault and then disappeared, I had no idea I was about to find this same pattern in other women who cried out for help and were ignored until they became statistics. The answer to the first question is simple. It wasn't a mistake, it was a signature. The second, more cruel. Someone was using the perfume as a symbol, a ritual, a message for anyone sensitive enough or traumatized enough to recognize it. The city of Savannah, with its historic streets, colonial homes, and Spanish moss-draped trails, has always seemed frozen in time. But behind the shuttered windows, friendly neighbors and expensive carpets, lies a darkness that local police seem to have learned to ignore. Not me. Because unlike other detectives, I knew exactly what it was like to be silenced. I grew up hearing the same phrase, "She must have left of her own free will," and I learned that when it comes to missing women, everyone chooses to believe that. With each step I took, the city echoed back to me more and more of its barely buried secrets. I began mapping the disappearances and realized there was an invisible thread connecting them all. A thread that ran through the local justice system, through the police stations, through the offices they pretended to protect. But no one wanted me to dig that deep. The scent of jasmine, which had previously made me nauseous, now guided me like a living clue. That night, staring at the open trunk under the ambulance's red lights, I realized the killer didn't just know the system, he was part of it. Erin Holloway hadn't slept in 3 days. Her face was already showing signs of wear, but she didn't care. She spent her nights in the police station's file room, surrounded by dusty boxes, stained folders, and reports printed on yellowed sheets. The more she read, the more her stomach churned. At least 9 women had disappeared in the last 8 years. All had filed police reports against their partners. All had left some trace behind, and all had been forgotten with the same justification: voluntary flight. She stopped at a specific file. Camila Torres, 32 years old, a nurse. She had reported her husband after showing up at the hospital with a black eye and cracked ribs. 6 months later, she disappeared. No one ever saw her again. The police report was 3 pages long and ended with an almost cynical note, probably left on her own after a domestic dispute. Erin pressed her fingers against the table. This wasn't carelessness. It was a deliberate choice not to investigate. Next to Camilla's name, another coincidence. Erin had seen that surname on a perfume purchase form. On impulse, she accessed the police station's digital system and accessed the warrant and civil records database. She found a delivery receipt for a purchase Camilla made a week before her disappearance. A bottle of jasmine, an artisanal brand, produced by a local natural fragrance store. She printed everything and pasted it onto the bulletin board she was putting together in a secluded room at the police station, a space no one had used since the retired sheriff had a heart attack there 5 years earlier. Erin turned the place into her own sanctuary of obsession. Photos, maps, red lines, and post-its. Each woman was a knot tied to a thread of pain that stretched straight to the heart of the city. What worried her most was the pattern. The allegations were never made immediately. They came after years of silence, after serious injuries or emotional crises that could no longer be disguised. And yet, in every case, there were delays in the investigation, witnesses were not interviewed, and police officers didn't see the need to investigate further. The pattern wasn't just with the abusive husbands, it was with those who were supposed to protect them. She cross-referenced the times on the records with the officers' shifts. In 5 of the 9 cases, the same sergeant had signed off on the report. In 4, the assigned investigator was Detective Louis Greer, now promoted to head of the intelligence section. Erin knew Greer. He was a polite man, too formal to be trusted, always with his tie adjusted and a cool smile, as if he knew the outcome of the conversation before it even began. He was respected, but something about him had put her on edge from day one. When she took the case to the district attorney, she was met with disdain. He barely glanced at the documents. He said they were old, closed cases, and that there was no funding or interest in reopening investigations based on assumptions. Erin left the room wanting to scream, but she knew any outburst now would be used against her. The system didn't like angry women. It preferred missing women. On the way back, he parked on a side street and sat in the car for a few minutes. He picked up one of the folders and stared at the photo of Evelyn Harper, a 40-year-old librarian who had been missing for 2 years. Evelyn had left behind 2 young children and, according to neighbors, had tried to move after reporting her ex-husband. But days before the move, he disappeared. Erin visited her house the next day, even though the case was closed. The house was now rented by another family, but in the attic there were still boxes of Evelyn's old things that no one wanted or knew what to do with. In one of them, among children's books and recipe books, was an envelope. Inside, a folded letter. The handwriting was firm. Evelyn wrote as if she knew no one would read it. She said she was scared, that she felt she was being followed, that someone from the police knew about her plan to leave with her children, because her ex-husband always seemed to know everything. She ended with a sentence that chilled Erin to the core. If something happens to me, look for the perfume. I hid it where he would never look. That same night, Erin returned to the police station and examined the contents seized at the time. There was no mention of a perfume bottle, but the file had been signed, once again, by Detective Louis Greer. She took a deep breath. She was beginning to see the bigger picture. It wasn't just about abusive husbands, it was about a network of men who protected each other, silencing women like Evelyn, Camilla, Lana, like her own mother. Erin looked at the mural again, feeling the scent of jasmine return, even if only in her memory. She didn't know how to prove it yet, but she was certain of one thing: it wouldn't stop on its own. She needed to break the cycle, even if it was alone. Erin descended the steps to the police station's basement, her cell phone flashlight on, as the stairwell light had been flickering for weeks without anyone noticing. Down below, the air was colder, heavier. The smell of moldy paper and old wood seemed to cling to her clothes. The filing cabinet door had no lock, just a sign in faded letters: restricted access to the technical sector. But no one really monitored it. It was a place everyone pretended to forget. In the corner of the room, surrounded by unstable stacks of boxes and files accumulated over decades, stood Reuben, thin, scruffy, and glasses crooked on his nose. He seemed a part of the environment. He'd been there so long that many of the newcomers didn't even know his name. Some called him the paper man or just the guy from the basement. Erin had known him since her early days on the force. They'd never really spoken, but she remembered well the way he'd looked at her when she'd filed her first police report, with regret, as if he already knew no one would do anything. "Reuben," she said, walking in slowly, "I need your help." He looked up over his glasses and nodded, not asking. He pointed to a chair, and as she sat down, he began pulling boxes from the shelf. "Don't you want to know what I'm looking for?" Erin asked. "I know what it is," he replied without taking his eyes off the labels. "It's after the missing women, the reports no one wants to read." Erin was silent for a moment, watching the way he handled the papers carefully, as if each folder were a story he knew by heart. "I tried to get into this years ago," Reuben said quietly, "but no one wanted to know. They said I was paranoid, that I was digging up old stuff, that I was messing with the big guys." He opened a box with a dented lid and pulled out a black folder, no name, no number. Inside were copies of police reports, photos printed on thermal paper, handwritten letters, and a list of 7 names, all of them known to Erin, all the names of the victims she'd been investigating. But there was an 8th name, one she hadn't seen yet. "Who's that?" Erin asked, pointing to the last line. "Grace Holloway," Reuben replied without hesitation. "Missing in 1993, disappeared the same way the others did." Erin felt the ground give way. Her throat went dry. She stood slowly, taking the paper in both hands. Grace Holloway was her mother. Reuben looked at her carefully for the first time. "I knew you'd get here. The system always covers its tracks, but you have just the right amount of pain to keep digging." She couldn't speak. Her mother's name was the same as the others, the old complaint filed on faded paper. The report, archived for lack of evidence, and in the description of the belongings left behind, it was there. Perfume bottle, amber glass, floral contents, jasmine. "You knew all this?" Erin asked, trying to control her tone. "I knew. Not everything, but enough to keep me up at night for a long time." He pulled out another folder, this one marked with a red X. He showed her a never-filed internal report, signed by a former retired police chief. It stated suspicions of a protection racket involving police officers, lawyers and public figures, a scheme to cover up abuse allegations in exchange for political favors, campaigning, and silence. Erin recognized several names, including Louis Greer's. "Why has this never come to light?" "Because the police chief died before filing the case. A heart attack," they said. "The file disappeared for years, until I found it under a pile of seized weapons documents. I kept it. I waited for someone to have the courage to reopen it." Erin's hands were shaking. She had the proof, or at least the right clues. Now she had to take a step from which there might be no turning back. "Are you really going to do this?" Reuben asked, reading her expression. She looked up at him firmly. "If I don't do it, no one else will." Reuben then took a small key that hung on the string around his neck and handed it to her. "This opens a cabinet behind the shelves in the records room. There's more stuff in there, things that should never have been deleted, but they were deleted anyway." Erin held the key like a weapon. For the first time, I felt I wasn't alone. There were people like her who refused to forget, even if they'd been forced to keep quiet for so long. When she left the archive, the jasmine scent seemed to have vanished for a few hours, but she knew it would return sooner or later, and next time, she would have names, dates, evidence, and a target. The building sat at the end of a dead-end street, obscured by tall trees and windows that looked like they hadn't opened in years. Erin climbed the creaking steps to the third floor, where the door to apartment 302 still had the name Elena Carver faded on the mailbox. The key was held by the victim's brother, who had authorized entry after learning the case was being reopened. He declined to go along. He said he couldn't bear to see her things without her there. The place smelled musty, but there was something familiar in the air. It wasn't the jasmine, not yet. It was a different kind of silence, dense, full of frozen memories. The furniture remained as it had been 2 years ago. The table was set with 2 chairs, one with a broken leg improvised from books. A picture frame faced the wall. The TV was covered with a sheet. Erin walked slowly around the room, taking in the details. There were toys in the corner, even though Eleanor didn't have children. Old dolls, baby clothes stored in bags, perhaps a preparation for something that never happened, or a reminder of a safer time. In the bedroom, she found the dresser with neatly folded clothes. Everything was organized, meticulous, but one of the drawers was stuck. She slowly pushed until it opened with a click. Inside, among old shirts and photos, was a rag doll, one eye missing, the neck seam ripped. Erin instinctively picked up the doll. There was something inside. Its weight was strange, unlike cotton. She squeezed a little tighter and felt the touch of paper. Carefully tearing open the loose stitching, she pulled out a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges. It had no address, no return address, only the handwritten text, "If I disappear, it wasn't by choice." She read the letter while sitting on the floor, her hands trembling slightly. Eleanor spoke of her fear. She said she felt watched, even inside her home, that messages were deleting themselves from her phone, that her complaint was received but never registered, that the attacker knew everything before she even opened her mouth, and worst of all, she said there was someone inside the police station feeding the attacker information. "I thought I was safe after I reported him, but the messages kept coming. Notes under the door, a bottle of jasmine left in the bathroom, the same perfume he gave me on our first birthday. I began to suspect the danger wasn't just him. Someone was protecting him. Someone who wore a uniform and knew my every move." Erin clutched the paper as if it were a thread connecting all the ghosts she carried. It was the first time one of the victims had spoken openly about an inside connection to the police, and once again the scent. The jasmine wasn't just a symbol, it was a threat. Continued reading. "If you're reading this, it might already be too late. Maybe I'm somewhere no one will find me, but please don't stop. Don't let him turn me into just another number. The person leaking information to him has access to the reports. He knows before anyone else. Don't trust anyone who tells you not to get involved, because they're the ones who bury the truth." Next to the letter, still inside the doll, was a folded copy of a receipt, a delivery from a local florist, dated 3 days before the disappearance. The order: Jasmine Essence Unmarked Delivery, recipient Elena Carver. Erin felt a shiver run down her spine. She picked up the receipt and took a picture with her phone. She needed to track down who placed that order. Maybe the store had cameras, records, maybe not. But this was another piece that fit together. Another woman who tried to warn, another who was silenced, but not anymore. Before leaving, he took one last stroll around the apartment. He glanced at the bookshelf, the books, the forgotten memories in cracked frames, and then he noticed something he'd overlooked, a mirror in the hallway, covered by a blue sheet. He carefully removed it. In the upper right corner, written in lipstick, was a single word: careful. She returned to the car with the letter folded in her inside coat pocket. The day was already growing dark. The city lights were beginning to come on, and with them, the weight of everything she carried increased. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a race against time, against a hidden network, and now against someone who already knew she was getting too close. That night, when Erin got home, she went straight to the bulletin board. She'd taped the letter right in the center, linking Elena to Grace, Camilla, Evelyn, Lana. It was all there. Only now, what had once been coincidences were beginning to reveal themselves for what they really were, part of a plan. And for the first time she was certain, the killer had not acted alone. The connection came in at 2:47 a.m., code 2735, domestic violence in progress. Erin was awake, as usual, checking connections on the bulletin board when the radio rang with the call. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat, holstered his pistol, and left without thinking. The address was in a middle-class area, not far from Evelyn Harper's house, a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by high walls and well-kept lawns. But she knew the worst almost always lived behind the cleanest facades. When she arrived, the ambulance's lights were already casting red reflections across the house's windows. 2 paramedics were talking on the sidewalk, one of them with blood-stained hands. Erin wasted no time. She walked straight through the unlocked door, ignoring the officer trying to follow protocol. Upstairs, the low sound of muffled crying guided her steps to the suite's bedroom. The woman was sitting on the floor wrapped in a thermal blanket, her face pressed against her knee. She was trembling but not speaking. Beside her, a younger officer tried to calm her down with a soft voice, offering her water. Erin motioned for her to continue. This wasn't the time for questioning. What had caught her attention was behind her, in the center of the room. The dark wood dresser was slightly open. On it, centered, sat an amber glass vial, new, untouched. And even before she approached, Erin could smell it, strong, familiar, almost suffocating. Jasmine. He approached slowly, examining it without touching. It was the same handmade model that appeared on the previous receipts. Gold lid, white label with cursive writing, but there were no visible prints, no smudges, no fingerprints. It sat there like a chess piece being moved with precision and left clearly to be found. Has the attacker been identified yet? Erin asked the police officer, without taking her eyes off the perfume. Neighbors said they heard screams and called the police. The partner fled through the backyard before the patrol arrived. He's already been identified. He's not a first-time offender. Erin crouched beside the victim. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with panic. He would send me pictures of myself sleeping from inside the house. I would lock the doors. I would change the locks, but still, he would come in. Did you report him before? Erin asked cautiously. The woman nodded, almost imperceptibly. 3 times. I only got a restraining order a week ago. Erin nodded slightly. She looked around. Nothing was broken in the room. No furniture was overturned. No objects were out of place. The assault had happened, but the scene had been set later. The vial was the final piece, a warning. That's when she noticed something strange, a small envelope inside the half-open dresser drawer. Using a pen, she pulled out the paper. It was blank, but the smell was the same, as if it had been sprayed on purpose. She put the envelope in a plastic bag and called forensics. She needed tests, any trace of DNA, any hair. The attacker wasn't messing around anymore. He was climbing, leaving messages, showing off. Outside the house, Erin called Ruben. I just came out of a scene. Same pattern. Jasmine bottle, no fingerprints, but with something new. What? He wants to be found. He's leaving clues, but in his own way. As if to say, look what I can do, and no one will stop me. This is a predator's game, Ruben replied. He's not hiding anymore. He's provoking and using the protective order as bait. She knew exactly when it went into effect. She knew no one would truly protect her. Have you managed to track down who bought the bottle? Not yet, but I'll pressure the store. I want footage from the last few weeks. If he went there, he left a trail. Before hanging up, Erin took one last look at the house. The woman, now taken away by ambulance, trembled silently. She had survived, but she was scarred, like all the others, like her mother, like herself, in another life. Hours later, at the police station, while he was reviewing the report, he noticed the vial was still in the evidence room, separated. He opened the protective bag and carefully read the label again. There was a tiny signature in the lower right corner, something he had missed before, MJ. The initials didn't match any of the victims, nor the assailant identified in the incident, but they seemed familiar. She wrote it down. She knew this detail was no coincidence, and that in time other pieces would emerge. The killer wanted to be seen, but not just any old way. He wanted her to see him, and now the game was officially on. Late that afternoon, as she reviewed the documents from the most recent case, Erin sensed a missing piece, a deeper connection between the attackers. Until now, they all seemed different at first glance. Various professions, distinct neighborhoods, age ranges that didn't form a clear pattern. But the frequency of the cases and the symbolic elements left behind showed it wasn't a coincidence. So she decided to cross-reference the names with local association records, searching for any formal connection that might exist between them. 3 hours and dozens of queries later, the point of intersection emerged. All the men investigated, without exception, had been active members of a private club on the outskirts of town. Magnolia Woods Hunting and Shooting Club. The name appeared discreetly on tax records and income tax returns. But there were no public photos, no official website, no social media accounts, just an address in a remote area, surrounded by dense forest and far from main roads. She called Ruben. I found what could be the basis of it all. A private club. The attackers frequented the same place. Do you have any idea what goes on in there? Not yet, but the board of directors has some well-known names. 2 city judges, a prosecutor, the former mayor, and, of course, Louis Greer. The silence on the other end of the line lasted longer than usual. "Are you going there?" "I'm already in the car." Erin drove for nearly 50 minutes before reaching the main gate. The sign was carved wood, weathered by the rain. There were no visible security guards, just a camera atop a leaning pole. She honked her horn. No one answered. She decided to go around the side of the property. She parked on the dirt road and walked through the woods. The sound of dry leaves under her boots was the only sound until, in the distance, she heard muffled voices and the dry crack of a gun. The clearing suddenly opened, revealing the shooting range. Men in camouflage laughed around a campfire. Some cleaned rifles. Others played cards over a cooler. Erin recognized 2 of them from archive photos. Evelyn Harper's husband and Elena Carver's partner. Both were still free, both as if nothing had happened. In the center of the group, holding up a plastic cup, was Louis Greer. Erin ducked behind a thick tree and pulled out her phone. She photographed every face. She took note of the parked cars. One of them, a black pickup truck, was identical to the one she'd seen parked near her house twice in the past few months. A chill ran down her spine. He walked back to the car with his heart racing. That confirmed everything. There was a circle, a space where men felt untouchable, where they could share stories, cover up crimes, and ensure no charges were filed. The club was more than a place of recreation. It was a meeting place for networked predators. The next morning, Erin confronted one of the names on the list who was still alive, Jared Klein, the ex-husband of one of the victims. He had been arrested for illegally carrying a weapon years ago, but the case was mysteriously dismissed. Erin met him leaving a cafe. He introduced himself and showed her the club's photos. "I know you were there the night Evelyn disappeared," she said firmly. "I know you two get together often, and now I want to know what happened in there." Jared laughed, with the arrogance of someone who has escaped justice more than once. "I don't know what you're talking about. So why was the perfume in her house? Why is your name on 4 club registration documents? Why were you seen with Louis Greer 2 weeks before she disappeared?" He looked away for a second, long enough for Erin to know he was close. "You shouldn't mess with that, detective. There are people there you can't face. But I will face it, because unlike you, I have nowhere to hide." She returned to the police station, certain that her next step would be even more dangerous. Now that she knew about the club, she also knew that each step could put her life at risk. But the line between fear and impulse had already been crossed. That night, when he arrived home, he saw an envelope wedged between the door and the frame. Inside was a single note: "You're getting close, but be careful. Some circles close with fire." And next to the paper, of course, a little bottle, intact, of jasmine. Erin began noticing the truck 2 days after her confrontation with Jared Klein. It wasn't something immediate. She never saw it clearly parked in front of her, never coincidentally on the same street, but she felt it. It was black, with slightly out-of-range headlights, a license plate partially covered in dust, and a scratch on the right side. The first time she thought it was paranoia. The second time she couldn't ignore it any longer. On the third, certainty dawned. She was leaving the market when she saw it in her side mirror, parked across the street, engine running. As soon as she got in the car and started driving, the vehicle shifted into gear and continued at the same pace, turning the corner a few seconds late, as if trying to appear casual. Erin took 2 different routes home that night, stopping at a gas station, making an unexpected turn, but the truck always appeared soon after. It only disappeared when she pulled into the driveway and automatically closed the gate. She didn't say anything to anyone, not even to Ruben, not even in a report. If there were eyes inside the system, any record could be read, any phone call could be listened to. The game had changed. Now she was in it. He began checking his car before leaving home. Headlights, brakes, seatbelt. He took different routes, stopped at random times. He slept with his pistol on his nightstand, but that didn't stop the shadow from approaching. On Friday night, she parked in front of her sister's apartment building to deliver documents. She stayed there for no more than 10 minutes. When she returned to the car, the driver's seat was slightly further back, almost imperceptibly, but she was certain of the position she had left earlier. She sat in slowly. The rear-view mirror also seemed slightly tilted. He turned the key. The engine started. There were no explosives, no alarms, but there was something else. The smell, strong, sweet, penetrating. Jasmine. Erin froze. The windows were all rolled up. The car was locked. No bottle in sight, but the scent was there, filling the air, filling her lungs with something that wasn't just aroma, it was provocation. He looked around. The street was empty, but now it wasn't just a symbolic threat. It was personal, a direct warning. If I can get into your car without being seen, I can get into your life too. She quickly left, locking the car and setting the alarm. She breathed deeply, trying to control the tremors in her hands. She spent the rest of the night reviewing security cameras she had installed weeks earlier at home. Nothing registered, but when she opened her email that morning, she found an anonymous message with no traceable sender. Did you smell the perfume? It's just the beginning. Reuben found her the next day, sitting on the sidewalk behind the police station, her eyes red and her hand clenched around a screwdriver. She'd been there for hours, unable to get in. He didn't need to ask. They crossed the line, she said. They crossed paths a while ago, he replied, looking around as if expecting to see someone step out of the shadows. Erin told him about the truck, about the car, about the smell. Reuben was silent for a moment, then handed her a small metal box. It's a hidden recorder. It works for up to 72 hours on a full battery. Put it in your car. And this one, he pulled out a second device, is a tracker. If you disappear, I'll know where to look. Erin packed everything into her bag, feeling a mixture of gratitude and anger. She was tired of being hunted. She needed to turn the tables. She spent the day trawling through the city's security records. She cross-referenced traffic camera data with the shooting range's meeting times. She isolated 3 truck models compatible with the one that was following her. One of them belonged to a retired police officer. The other belonged to one of the partners in the flower shop that sold the perfume. And the third belonged to Louis Greer. His file was now taped to the center of the bulletin board. Erin circled the photo with a red pen. He was the one appearing at the ends of every thread. The ignored reports, the closed investigations, the victims who disappeared soon after the reports, the encounters at the club, and now the scent trail inside her car. The only question was he part of the game or was he the main player? When she finally closed the house and lay down, locking every window, every door, she stared at the dark ceiling for hours. Sleep was impossible, because now she knew that somewhere outside the truck was parked waiting, watching, and she also knew that from that point on, she couldn't miss a step. The hunter had already shown that he saw everything, that he knew the shortcuts, that he could go through any door. But Erin was no longer a potential victim. She was the next target who had decided to fight back. The clinic was on the outskirts of town, surrounded by an iron fence covered in ivy and an uncomfortable silence that seemed to be part of the landscape. Erin had to fill out 3 forms and wait for almost an hour before being allowed in. The director was clear. The patient had frequent seizures, difficulty concentrating, and was taking prescription medication. But Erin didn't need much. She just wanted to listen. The girl's name was Lily Harper, Evelyn's daughter. She was 14 now. He was 7 when his mother disappeared. Since then, she had been in and out of foster homes, suffering from panic attacks and recurring nightmares. After her 3rd escape attempt, the state decided to institutionalize her for protection, but Erin knew the decision was actually made to make her easier to forget. The room was simple, with pale walls and no sharp objects or exposed electrical outlets. Lily sat on the edge of the bed, her feet swinging slightly. Her gaze was distant, fixed on the closed window. She wore a loose sweatshirt and kept her hands hidden in its sleeves. "Hi, Lily," Erin said softly. "I'm a friend of your mum's." The girl didn't answer. She continued looking outside, as if nothing had been said. Erin approached slowly, pulled out a chair, and sat across from her. "I'm trying to understand what happened that night. Do you remember?" Lily blinked slowly. Then she turned her face toward Erin for the first time, and then she whispered, "The smell arrived before the scream." Erin swallowed hard. "What did you mean by that?" The girl didn't answer. She just repeated, "The smell arrived before the scream." Erin picked up her notebook. She tried another approach. "Have you smelled that before, Lily? Have you ever heard of it? It was sweet, very sweet." And then he appeared. "Who is he?" Lily rubbed her eyes with the sleeves of her sweatshirt. "He came in quietly. I was in the hallway. Mom was crying. I saw the door open. There was a shadow, but no face, just the smell." Erin leaned in a little closer. "Did you see the man?" "I saw the shoes. They were black, with a red spot on the side." "And did you tell anyone?" The girl let out a weak laugh, a laugh that hurt to hear. "They said I made it up, that it was all in my head, that I was traumatized, but I saw it. And he saw me too. I was hiding behind the bookshelf. He looked in my direction, but he didn't say anything. He just left, slowly, as if he wasn't in a hurry." Erin wrote down every word. "Could you draw this man? He had no face, just shoes and smell." Erin pulled a piece of paper and a pen from her bag and handed them to the girl. "Draw the shoes for me." Lily slowly picked up the pen and began to scribble. Her strokes were hesitant but firm. When she finished, she pushed the paper toward Erin, and next to the drawing, she wrote, "MJ." Erin felt her spine go cold. "Where did you see this?" Lily pointed to the memory, to the inside of her head. It was on his hand, engraved on a ring. Erin held the paper carefully, as if she were holding a piece of gold. It was more than a detail. It was a signature, the same one she'd seen on the pot of jasmine left in the car, the initials that always returned like a shadow hard to erase. She got up, approached the bed, and lightly touched the girl's shoulder. "Thank you, Lily. I believe in you. The teenager gave a slight smile, the first in a long time. Most people prefer not to believe. It's less work. On the way out, Erin passed a nurse in the hallway. Did she say anything useful? The woman asked skeptically. Everything I needed. Outside, the sky threatened rain. The wind shook the trees more violently than usual. Erin got into the car and rested her forehead on the steering wheel for a few seconds. Now she knew the killer wasn't just cautious. He was someone who enjoyed being seen, as long as no one could touch him. He called Ruben. I have something new. Say, MJ. It's engraved on a ring a witness saw, and that same person described the man's shoes to me, with a stain, on the right side, just like the pair seen on the gas station's surveillance camera, days before Evelyn's disappearance. Now we have what we need to pull this identity. It's still not enough, but it's getting closer. She hung up, but didn't leave. She stayed there, in the car, with the feeling that something was about to break. Not just the case, hers too, because listening to that girl, locked in a hospital for telling the truth, was like hearing the voice of her own childhood. More than an investigation, it was a reckoning with the past, with all the voices that had been ignored, including her mother's. The police station bathroom was empty. Erin braced her hands on the sink and stared at her reflection. The dark circles under her eyes were deeper, her skin paler, and there was something in her gaze she barely recognized, a build-up of undigested anger mixed with exhaustion and despair. The voices from the station sounded in the background like distant echoes. Everything seemed too far away, unreal. He washed his face, but the water didn't wash away what was on it. Not the smell, not the feeling that something inside him was starting to break. He picked up the paper towel and dried it slowly before turning toward the door. That morning, Louis Greer was promoted. He was now the district's director of operations. The ceremony was quick, formal, and filled with speeches about honor and commitment to justice. Erin watched it all on the surveillance room monitor. He smiled for the cameras, shook hands, and thanked them with false humility. In the background, a flag fluttered from the wall. She turned off the monitor, almost broke the screen in the process. Ruben appeared minutes later. Did you see? We. And now? Erin didn't answer. She grabbed the photos from the wall and tossed them into a folder. Eleanor's letter, the flower shop receipt, Lily's drawing, everything. She had a plan or something close to it. He knows I'm getting close. That's why he's protecting himself more. What are you thinking of doing? She looked at him seriously. What no one else had the courage to do. Ruben leaned against the door. This will destroy you, Erin. If you do it outside the law, they win because they'll turn you into a criminal. And if I stay within the law, the next woman will pay. The next child. The next 7-year-old Erin locked in her room, waiting for her mother to return. The sentence hung in the air like a knife. For the first time, she had said out loud what she had avoided for years. It wasn't just about the victims. It was about her. It was about the girl who also wasn't heard. He left the room without waiting for an answer. He got in his car and drove aimlessly. He passed streets he knew by heart, cutting through the city like an open wound. The places seemed the same, but the city was different. At every intersection, a dilemma. Stop or accelerate. Think or act. She parked in front of the house of the former prosecutor involved in the shooting club investigations, the same one who laughed at her when she tried to reopen the cases. Now he was retired, living alone, shielded by memories and silence. Erin knocked on the door. The gun wasn't visible, but her gaze was enough. He opened it hesitantly. Detective Holloway. We need to talk. He tried to say something, but she was already inside the house. You knew from the beginning. You knew what was happening, and you did nothing. It's not that simple. It's exactly like that. She tossed the papers she was carrying onto the table. The perfume receipt, the club connections, the signatures on ignored reports. Greer's name circled in red. That's enough to open a federal investigation. And have you already delivered this? Not yet. Because if I deliver and nothing happens, this will all go up in smoke, and I've seen up close what the smoke covers. He watched her in silence for a few seconds. Then he said, You won't be able to beat this system alone. She approached, slowly. I don't want to defeat the system. I want to destroy it from within. He left without waiting for an answer. The words hung like wildfire in the air. That night, alone at home, Erin stared at the gun on the table. The same one she'd learned to shoot from her father. The one she'd sworn to use only to protect. Now the line between protection and revenge seemed thinner than ever. She spent the night writing a complete dossier, with evidence, with testimonies, with dates, material ready to be sent in case she disappeared. She made 5 copies. She kept one at the police station, another with Ruben, one with her sister, and 2 in an encrypted cloud. On the bedroom mirror with a red pen he wrote, If I disappear, look for MJ. Then she lay in bed, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. There were 2 versions of her now, one that still believed in justice, another that harbored a dark desire for self-righteousness, and neither was willing to back down. That night she didn't hear the sound of the car pulling up, but you smelled it before you knew it. Jasmine, stronger than ever. Erin didn't sleep. The next morning he went straight to the university's forensic lab, where he had a trusted contact. He handed over the vial bearing the initials MJ and requested urgent analysis. Fingerprints, particles, DNA, anything that might point to a name. Hours passed. When the report arrived, the weight in her hands was almost unbearable. She didn't need to open it to know she was about to confirm what her instincts had been screaming for days. The envelope was thick, sealed with the red tape that marked sensitive data. She read there in cold letters, DNA compatible with sample registered in the national database. Identification, Michael Jonathan Greer. Erin felt the air drain away for a moment. The initials, the perfume, the ring, the shoes, the club, it all led back to him. Louis Greer, the man who headed police operations, the man who lectured on justice, the man who held her employment record in his hands, who had approved her entry into the force, who she now knew had chosen to closely monitor her career, like someone who shapes a piece so it doesn't get out of hand. Back at the police station, she entered Ruben's office without knocking. She tossed the report on the table. He read it silently. Then she looked at her as if she were seeing someone about to do something from which there would be no turning back. And now? Now he will pay. Ruben swallowed hard. Are you going to report him? Erin shook her head. He'll get away. He always does. He'll say he was planted, that it was a setup. He'll smile for the press, get a $20,000 lawyer, and walk away a hero. Ruben took a deep breath. Do you really want to go that way? I no longer have a path. I have names, and none of them have received justice. She left the room and drove to the Magnolia Woods clubhouse. She knew Greer would be there that late afternoon. Every Friday he participated in the Circle of Honor. It was tradition, men sitting around a campfire, drinking expensive whiskey, and discussing the world as if they owned it. And they did. In a way. Erin parked across the road and walked the trail as before, only this time there was no hesitation. At her waist, the pistol. In her pocket, the medical report. And inside her coat, Elena's letter, Lily's drawing, the last photo of Grace Holloway. She reached the clearing and stood there watching. Greer was standing, saying something to the others. They were laughing. They didn't notice her right away, until he saw her. For a second, his smile faltered. Detective Holloway, he said, opening his arms as if welcoming a distinguished guest. What are you doing here? Erin didn't answer. She walked over to him slowly, took the envelope out of her pocket, and handed it to him. You know what's in there. Greer didn't read it. He just held the envelope as if holding any piece of paper. That doesn't prove anything, he said calmly. And even if it did, you know it won't amount to anything. She took a step forward. I know. That's why I'm here. Erin's hand trembled as it rested on the gun. Greer noticed and smiled again. You're not going to do that. Why not? Because you're a law enforcement officer. You believe in the system. I believed. The metallic click of the gun's hammer was louder than the wind through the trees, but she didn't pull the trigger. Not yet. Instead, he turned around and walked to his truck. He took his cell phone out of his pocket, recording everything, and began narrating. This is Detective Erin Holloway. I'm at the Magnolia Woods Club in front of suspect Michael Jonathan Greer, identified as responsible for a series of disappearances linked to domestic violence. I have reports, documents, and evidence confirming his direct involvement in the crime scenes. Greer ran to her and tried to snatch the phone from her hand, but she had already sent it to 3 contacts and turned on automatic backup. It's over, she said firmly. You destroyed your career, and you destroyed lives. A police car siren wailed in the distance. Erin had called Ruben before leaving, and he knew what to do. She stood there, watching as the other men in the club fell silent. One by one they looked at Greer, wary, wary. The silent empire was beginning to crumble. Greer was arrested that night, not because of his confession, but because of information leaked to the press by anonymous sources. The city woke to headlines. The police department collapsed. Cases were opened. Old cases were re-examined. Erin was temporarily removed. She was charged with breach of protocol and improperly disclosing confidential documents. But none of that mattered, because for the first time someone with power has fallen, and the scent of jasmine stopped haunting the city's corridors. For now. If this story has kept you hooked so far, just imagine what else is yet to come. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next cases. Some secrets haven't been revealed yet.